Camille Ashford ripped the keys from her driver's hand, flung them across the oil-stained concrete, and let them skid to a stop at the boots of the man everyone in town called a failure. "You've got until sunset," she said, not even blinking. "Fix my Bentley, or I walk, and your dying son can find another miracle." The garage went dead silent. Because Calvin Reed hadn't told a single soul his boy was sick. So how did a stranger, in a $2 million suit, know wherever you're watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far Calvin's story travels. And if you believe a good man should never be counted out, subscribe and ride with us to the very end. The wrench slipped and Calvin Reed busted his knuckle open on the engine block for the third time that morning. He didn't curse. He'd taught himself not to curse anymore, not since Micah started repeating everything he heard. He just pressed his thumb against the split skin, watched a bead of blood rise up dark, and breathed out slow through his nose the way his old mentor Earl used to. "You fight the machine wins," Earl always said. "You listen to it, it'll tell you everything." Calvin was 51 weeks behind on listening to anything but bad news. The phone on the workbench started buzzing again. He knew that number by heart now. He knew it the way a man knows the sound of the one dog on the street that bites. St. Aloysius Children's Hospital. He wiped his hands on the rag hanging from his belt, left a smear of red across the gray cotton, and picked it up before it could ring a fourth time and wake something in him he couldn't afford to wake at 8 in the morning. "This is Calvin." "Mr. Reed, it's Denise from billing at St. Aloysius. I'm so sorry to keep calling." "You don't have to be sorry, Denise. You're just doing your job." She paused. People always paused when he was kind to them. They expected a man 3 months behind on a pediatric bill to be angry, and when he wasn't, it seemed to knock them off balance. "Mr. Reed, I'll be straight with you because I think you'd want me to be. Dr. Halloran's team has Micah scheduled for the cardiac procedure, but the financial office won't release the OR date without a deposit on file. The full estimate came back higher than we quoted. It's..." Another pause. The sound of a keyboard, a human being deciding whether to say a number out loud that would ruin somebody's whole life. "It's sitting at 51,400. Calvin looked up in the calendar taped over the parts cabinet. Micah's drawing of the two of them was pinned beside it, 2 stick figures, one big and one small, holding hands under a lopsided sun. The kid had written, "Under the hood, me and Dad," in shaky pencil letters. 51,000, Calvin repeated. His voice didn't shake. That was the thing that would have surprised anybody who knew what was happening inside him. His voice came out steady as a torque reading. "I quoted 38 in the spring. The specialist they brought in changed the surgical plan. It's safer for Micah. It's more. Safer's what I want." He said it fast before she could hear anything cracking. "Safer for my boy is all I ever want. When do you need the deposit? They're holding the date for 2 weeks. After that, they have to give the slot to another child on the list. I hate this part of my job, Mr. Reed. I want you to know that." "I know it, Denise. I don't hold it against you. You go home tonight, and you hug whoever you got, you hear me? Don't let a bill make you forget you're a person." There was a long silence on the line, and then Denise from billing at St. Aloysius Children's Hospital, a woman he had never met and never would, said in a wet voice, "God bless you, Mr. Reed," and hung up before he could hear her cry. Calvin set the phone down face first on the bench. 2 weeks. He had in his checking account $416. He had a garage, the bank half-owned a tow truck with a slipping transmission he couldn't afford to fix for himself, and a customer list that had been shrinking every quarter since the dealership chain opened its glass and steel service center out by the interstate. The one with the free coffee and the leather waiting room chairs, and the sign out front that said, "Certified Technicians." As if a man who'd been turning wrenches for 20 years in this same building was somehow uncertified to touch a Buick. He looked at the stick figure drawing again. He made himself look at it. 2 weeks, he said out loud to no one, to Earl, if Earl was listening from wherever good mechanics went. "All right, 2 weeks. We've done more with less." They had not in fact ever done more with less. But a man tells himself things in an empty garage that he'd never say to another living soul, and God forgives him for it. Micah was doing his best not to look tired, which was the thing that hurt worst of all. Calvin came through the back door of the little house at 6:15, and his son was already at the kitchen table in his school clothes working a spoon slowly around a bowl of cereal, like the spoon weighed more than it used to. The boy's lips had that faint bluish cast at the edges that the doctors had a long name for a cast that got worse when he ran, which was why Micah didn't run anymore, which was the cruelest sentence Calvin knew how to think an 8-year-old who had taught himself not to run. "There he is," Calvin said, and made his voice big and bright the way you flip a shop light on in a dark bay. "There's my head mechanic." "Dad?" Micah rolled his eyes, but he was smiling. "I'm not a mechanic. I'm 8. Earl was 8 once. Nobody starts out 50. You eat that whole bowl. Most of it. Most of it." Calvin dropped a kiss on top of his son's head and felt the way he always did now, how the boy's heartbeat lived a little too close to the surface, fluttering fast like a bird that had gotten into the house. "Most of it'll have to do. Grab your bag, Speedy. Bus won't wait, and Mrs. Okafor doesn't like it when the Reed men are late." "You're always late." "I'm fashionably late. There's a difference. When you own a business, you get to call it fashionable." Micah laughed, and the laugh turned into a small cough, and the small cough turned into Calvin standing very still with his hand on his son's back, waiting, counting the way he counted the beats of an engine he was worried about. 1, 2, 3. The cough passed. The boy took a breath that filled all the way up. "I'm okay, Dad," Micah said, because he was 8, and he already knew how to read his father's face. "Stop counting. I can tell when you're counting." "I'm not counting. You always count." Calvin crouched down so they were eye to eye. He put both hands on the boy's shoulders, and he made himself say the thing he'd been saying every morning for 4 months, because a promise repeated enough times becomes a floor a boy can stand on. "Listen to me. You know what I do all day. Fix cars. I fix the thing everybody else gave up on. People roll in here, they say, 'Calvin, this one's done, it's junk, send it to the crusher.' And I put my hands on it, and I find the one little thing nobody else looked hard enough to see. And I fix it. That's my whole job. Finding the little thing." He squeezed. "You're my boy. There is not one machine on God's earth I care about more than you. So whatever the doctor's got to fix, I'm going to find the way. You hear me? I'm going to find the little thing." Micah looked at him with those solemn brown eyes that were far too old for his face. "Okay, Dad," he said, and then quieter. "But we don't have the money, do we?" Calvin's whole chest went to concrete, because that was the other cruel thing. His son was smart. His son had been sitting at that table for 4 months, listening to a father who thought he was whispering. "You let me worry about money," Calvin said. "That's a grown-up machine. You worry about spelling and staying off the monkey bars." "Deal." "Deal." "Give me the shake." They shook the way they'd shaken since Micah was 3. Grip twist bump, the little handshake Dana had invented before she got sick back when there were 3 of them, and the future was just a thing that hadn't arrived yet, instead of a thing that kept arriving with a bill attached. Calvin watched the bus swallow his son and pull away, and he stood in the road until it turned the corner, and then he drove back to the garage to try one more day to squeeze a miracle out of a 12-year-old air compressor and a bank of customers who'd rather trust a machine that talked back to them than a man who'd never once lied to their face. The first customer of the day was Mr. Pettigrew, who was 80 and came in every Thursday, whether his Crown Victoria needed anything or not, mostly because his wife had passed and the garage was somewhere to be around another human voice. Calvin never charged him for the diagnostics. He'd top off the man's fluids, tell him the old boat was running like a dream, and listen to the same 3 stories about Korea he'd been hearing for 6 years, because some things you did for money, and some things you did because your mama raised you right. The second customer was trouble, and Calvin smelled it before the man was all the way out of his SUV. "You read." The man had a clipboard, which was never good, and a polo shirt with a corporate logo stitched on the chest, which was worse. "I'm Calvin Reed. This is my shop." "Yeah, see, that's the thing." The man clicked his pen. You've got a repair order out on a 2019 Tahoe, customer name of Bianchi. Customers disputing the charge. Says you told him it was the transmission charged him $400 and the problem came back a week later. Calvin didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. Earl had drilled that out of him too. A quiet man in a loud trade earns a certain kind of trust right up until the day the world decides not to give it to him. I told Mr. Bianchi his transmission mount was cracked, and it was, and I replaced it. And I've got the old part in a box in the back with his name written on it in marker, because I keep every part I pull for exactly this reason. The problem that came back is a wheel bearing, which is a separate repair which I flagged for him in writing, and he declined. Calvin wiped his hands slow. You want to see the box? I want to see the documentation. I've got documentation. I write everything down. Been writing everything down for 20 years because men come in here and look at me and decide before they get out of the truck that I'm gonna cheat 'em. He said it flat, no heat in it, which somehow made it land harder. So I write it all down. Come on back. I'll show you the mount. I'll show you the signed decline. I'll show you the whole file. The man's ears went a little red. He'd been sent here expecting a con artist, and he was getting a filing system. 10 minutes later, the clipboard man was gone, muttering about a misunderstanding. And Calvin was standing alone in his shop with a cracked transmission mount in his hand, and the specific bone-deep tiredness of a man who has to prove he isn't a criminal before he's allowed to do his job. He set the mount back in its box. He looked at the marker letters Bianchi and the date in his own careful hand. You'd think, he said to the empty garage to Earl, that after 20 years it'd get easier. It just gets the same, every time. The same. The empty garage didn't answer. It never did. But somewhere under the concrete in the place where a man keeps the things he learned from the people who loved him, Earl's voice said, what it always said. Don't let 'em make you into what they think you are. You let 'em turn you bitter. They win twice. Calvin nodded to nobody. He picked his wrench back up. By 2 in the afternoon, he'd made $90, all of it. Mr. Pettigrew's grandson coming by to pay for an oil change on the sly because the old man would have refused it. $90. $51,400 needed. 2 weeks. Calvin sat on the rolling stool in the middle of his empty shop and did the math he'd been avoiding, and the math was a wall, and there was no door in the wall, and he pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and let himself feel it. Just for a minute, just for 60 seconds, because a man is allowed 60 seconds. He thought about selling the shop. He'd get pennies. The bank owned half. He thought about the tow truck. Maybe $2,000. He thought about Dana's ring, which he'd sworn on her grave he'd give to Micah someday, and the thought made him physically sick, standing up off the stool, with his stomach turning, because what good was a ring on a dead woman's memory if the living boy she left behind didn't make it to 9? He would sell the ring. He knew in that moment, standing in the middle of his failing garage with $90 in the till, that he would sell his dead wife's ring, and he would find a way to live with it. Because that's what fathers do. They trade the things that break their hearts for the things that keep their children breathing. Forgive me, Dana, he whispered. I'll get it back, somehow. I'll get it back and give it to him and tell him it was always yours. And that was the exact moment the black Bentley pulled up outside. Calvin heard it before he saw it. That was a mechanic's curse and a mechanic's gift. He heard engines the way a musician hears a room. And this engine was wrong. It was a 12-cylinder, and it should have purred like money. And instead, it had a stumble in it, a tiny hitch, a half-beat catch every few seconds, like a man with a limp trying to walk normal, so nobody notices. Most people would never have heard it. The Bentley's owner had clearly paid a great many people a great deal of money to make it stop, and it hadn't stopped. The car rolled to the curb in front of Reed and Son Auto, gleaming black, worth more than Calvin's house and his shop and his truck put together, and doubled. A driver in a gray suit stepped out first and opened the rear door, and Camille Ashford stepped out into the oil-stained afternoon like she'd taken a wrong turn out of a magazine. She was young, startlingly young, younger than the money on her had any right to be, and she moved the way people move when they have never once in their life had to wait for anything. She looked at the garage. She looked at the peeling paint, the hand-lettered sign, the tow truck with the bad transmission, and Calvin watched her file all of it into some cold internal ledger and come up with a verdict before she'd said a single word. Then she looked at Calvin in his coveralls, with the blood-smeared rag on his belt, and the verdict got colder. "Is there an actual technician here?" she said. "Or is it just you?" Calvin had heard that sentence, or some cousin of it, 1,000 times. It never got easier. But he'd learned to let it roll off the way water rolls off a waxed hood. "It's just me, Calvin Reed. What can I do for you? I doubt very much you can do anything for me." She circled the Bentley without touching it, the way you'd walk around a horse you didn't trust. "But I've run out of people who can. Do you even know what this is? It's a Bentley Continental, twin-turbo W12. And you've got a misfire she's hiding under the tune because somebody's been chasing it long enough that the car's learned to compensate." Calvin nodded toward the hood. "Hear that little catch? Every 3-4 seconds. That's not a happy car. That's a car working real hard to sound happy." Camille Ashford stopped walking, for just a fraction of a second, so fast that anyone not paying attention would have missed it. The cold slipped. Because 3 dealerships and a team of factory-certified engineers and a diagnostic computer worth more than Calvin's entire building had not put it in language that plain. They'd handed her invoices. They'd handed her printouts. Not one of them had stood in front of her and said, "That's a car working real hard to sound happy," and heard it the way a doctor hears a heart he doesn't like. But the cold came right back down, because that's what the cold was for. "So you can hear a noise," she said. "Congratulations. The last man who touched this had a wall of certificates and a machine that cost 6 figures. And he told me the car was fine. It is not fine. I have a board presentation in this vehicle tomorrow morning. A live product demonstration in front of 40 people who are deciding whether my company survives the year. And if it stumbles once on camera in front of them, I lose everything I've spent 3 years building. Do you understand everything?" "I understand a person under pressure," Calvin said quietly. "I understand that better than you'd think." "I don't want your understanding. I want it fixed." "Then let me look at it. Bring it into the bay. I'll pull the codes, and I'll—" "By sunset." Calvin blinked. "Ma'am, a phantom misfire that 3 shops couldn't find isn't a by sunset." She said it like the sun set at her command. "It's just after 2. You have until the sun goes down. If it's running perfectly by then, I'll pay you triple your rate. If it isn't, I take my car to the manufacturer's flagship service center tonight, and I never think about this street again." And there it was, the thing that turned Calvin's blood to something colder than hers. Because a woman like that offering triple was nothing. He'd have looked at the car for free. That was just who he was. Triple his rate was maybe $600. $600 against $51,400 was a raindrop against a drought. He almost said no. He almost said, "Lady, take your beautiful broken car and your ugly attitude somewhere else. I've got a ring to sell and a boy to save, and I don't have time to be looked down on today." He almost said it. And then Camille Ashford said the thing that stopped his heart. "How's your son doing, Mr. Reed?" The wrench went still in Calvin's hand. The whole world went still. The traffic on the street, the pigeons on the wire, the 12-year-old air compressor ticking in the corner, all of it seemed to hold its breath at once, and Calvin stood there in his own garage and felt the ground he'd been standing on for 35 years tilt 3 degrees to the left. "What did you say?" "Micah, 8 years old. Congenital heart condition, a septal defect, I believe complicated by an arrhythmia. Scheduled for surgery at St. Aloysius." Camille Ashford examined her nails. $51,400, which you don't have, which you're never going to have running a garage that clears, $90 on a good day. You were going to sell something today. A ring, maybe. I can usually tell by the face. Calvin's voice came out of him low and rough and dangerous in a way it had not been in years. "How do you know my son's name?" "I know a great many things. Knowing things is the entire reason I have that car, and you have this building." She finally looked up, and her eyes were flat and clear and utterly without cruelty, which was somehow worse than cruelty, because cruelty at least had feeling in it. "I do my research, Mr. Reed, Before I walk into any room, I know who's in it. You are the fourth mechanic in this city I've stood in front of today. The other three had clean shops and framed diplomas, and they wasted my afternoon. So before I wasted a fourth hour, I found out who I was actually dealing with, and I found out you're a desperate man. She let that sit. Desperate men try harder. You looked into my son. It wasn't a question. Calvin's hand had closed around the wrench so tight, his split knuckle reopened. You looked into my dying boy, so you'd know how hard to squeeze me. I looked into you so I'd know if you had a reason to actually solve my problem, instead of stringing me along for a repair order like everyone else. Turns out you have 51,000 reasons. She turned, walked to the rear door of the Bentley, and pulled from the seat a slim leather folder. She held it out. Calvin didn't take it. She set it on the workbench instead, right on top of Micah's drawing, right on top of me and Dad. Here's my offer, Mr. Reed, and I'll only make it once, so listen carefully because I think a man like you doesn't get offered things very often. She straightened, and for the first time the full weight of who she was settled over the garage like a shadow. You fix my car completely perfectly running, like the day it left the factory before the sun goes down tonight. And I will personally cover your son's surgery. All of it. The deposit, the procedure, the recovery, the specialist. $51,400 wired to St. Aloysius before Micah goes under the knife. The words hit Calvin like a wave hits a man standing in the surf, who wasn't ready for it, knocked the wind clean out of him, took his legs, filled his mouth with salt. His son. His son's whole life laid out on his own workbench on top of a crayon sun by a stranger. And if I can't, he heard himself say, if I can't fix it by sunset. Camille Ashford picked up her keys. The driver's keys, which she'd never intended to use, because she'd never once in her life driven her own car, and she flung them onto the concrete floor, and they skittered across the oil stains and stopped ringing against Calvin's boots. Then you get nothing, she said. And your son finds another miracle. There's no participation trophy here, Mr. Reed. You either fix what $100,000 of technology couldn't, or your boy loses his slot to the next child on the list. Those are the only two outcomes. That's the whole deal. Calvin looked down at the keys against his boots. He looked at the folder on Micah's drawing. He looked at this young woman who had walked into his life 2 minutes ago and put his son's heart on a table like a poker chip. And for one long, terrible moment, everything Earl had ever taught him about not letting the world turn him bitter went to war with everything a father is built to feel. You know what you're doing, Calvin said very quietly. You're standing in my shop in front of my son's drawing and you're dangling his life in front of me, like a treat in front of a dog. You know that's what you're doing. Yes, Camille Ashford said. She didn't flinch from it. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm giving a man who has no options. One option. You can be offended by the shape of the gift, or you can take it and save your child. Pride is a luxury, Mr. Reed. I'd have thought you couldn't afford it. And Calvin Reed, 35 years old, $416 to his name. 20 years of grease under his nails, and a boy at home who had taught himself not to run, bent down slowly and picked the keys up off the floor. His hand was shaking. He hated that his hand was shaking, and he couldn't make it stop. I have some rules, he said, closing his fist around the keys. In my shop, you want me to work, you follow 'em. Camille raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating. I'm telling you how it's going to be. Rule 1, you don't touch the car while I'm working. You don't touch my tools, and you don't stand over my shoulder telling me what 3 other shops already told you. If I wanted their answers, I'd get their answers. I want the truth, and the truth takes quiet. He walked past her to the Bentley, ran one hand along the hood, feeling the heat and the hum and the little wrong catch of it under his palm. Rule 2. That folder comes off my son's picture, right now. You don't ever put money on top of that boy's face again in this life. For a second, just a second, something moved behind Camille Ashford's eyes that hadn't moved all afternoon. She crossed the shop. She picked the leather folder up off Micah's drawing. She looked at the crayon stick figures, the lopsided son, me and Dad, in a child's shaking hand, and Calvin watched her look at it, and he watched the thing behind her eyes move again further this time, before the shutter came back down. "There," she said, holding the folder against her chest. "Rule 2. Anything else?" Rule 3. Calvin popped the Bentley's hood and looked down into 12 cylinders of German engineering that had defeated everyone smarter than him and richer than him and more respected than him would ever be. He rolled up his sleeves. His split knuckle left a small red print on the shining fender, and he didn't wipe it off because a man leaves his mark on the work whether the world likes it or not. Rule 3, Calvin Reed said. "When I fix it, and I'm gonna fix it, you're gonna stand right there and watch. And you're gonna remember for the rest of your life that the thing your $100,000 couldn't find got found by a man you wouldn't have let touch your car if you weren't desperate. That's my price, not the money. That." He looked up at her, and for the first time all afternoon, he wasn't the one being looked down on. "You in?" Camille Ashford held his gaze for a long, long moment. The sun had already started its slide toward the rooftops. The clock was running. Somewhere across town, a hospital was holding a slot for a boy with a bird's heartbeat, and the slot had 2 weeks and shrinking, and the only bridge between that boy and that slot was a broken engine and a proud man in a stranger's shadow. "I'm in," she said, and Calvin Reed picked up his light, leaned down over the engine of a $2 million machine that had beaten everybody else in the city, and did the one thing he'd been doing his whole life that nobody had ever thought to respect him for. He went quiet, and he started to listen. The first thing Calvin did was nothing at all. He stood over the open engine hands at his sides, head tilted, and he let the Bentley idle. Just idle. For 2 full minutes, he didn't touch a single tool, and behind him, he could feel Camille Ashford's impatience building like pressure in a line. "Are you going to work?" she finally said, "or meditate? I'm working." "You're standing there." "I'm listening." Calvin didn't turn around. "You paid 3 shops to grab their scanners and start swapping parts the second they popped the hood. How'd that go for you?" She didn't answer. "Right," Calvin said. "So we're gonna do it my way. And my way starts with me shutting up and the car talking." He closed his eyes. There it is again. Hear it, that little catch. It's not random. It's got a rhythm to it. A machine doesn't do anything for no reason, ma'am. Everything that's wrong is wrong for a reason. You just gotta be quiet long enough to let it tell you. Camille came a step closer despite herself, and this time she was listening too, straining, and Calvin heard her hear it, the tiny hitch in the 12-cylinder purr, the half-beat stumble every 3 seconds or so. "I don't hear a rhythm," she said. "It sounds random to me." "That's because you're listening with your ears. You gotta listen with the whole thing." He tapped his own chest with 2 grease-black fingers. "You wait long enough, you stop hearing a noise and you start feeling a pattern. Same as anything. Same as a person." He opened his eyes. "How long's this car had the stumble?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. "And what happened 6 or 7 weeks ago?" Camille blinked. "What do you mean, what happened?" "To the car. Body shop. Detailing. Somebody jump it. New stereo. New tint. Anybody in the electrical cars don't get sick out of nowhere any more than boys do." He said the last part before he thought about it, and it landed in the garage, and sat there heavy, and he saw her flinch just slightly, and he almost felt bad. Almost. Something changed. Think. She was quiet a moment. It was in the shop, the dealership, for a recall, a software thing, an update. And a week after I got it back, it started. Calvin nodded slowly, and something behind his eyes clicked on the same thing that clicked on when a customer said, "It only does it when it rains, or only after I fill up the tank." "A week after," he repeated. "Not right away, a week." Is that important? Might be everything, might be nothing. He rolled his stool over to the workbench, and now his hands started to move sure and unhurried, laying out tools in a line the way a surgeon lays out instruments. See if the software update did it. You'd have the stumble the day you drove off the lot, right away. But a week later means something they touched while they were in there, came loose slow, vibrated its way loose, a connector, a ground, He stopped himself. I'm getting ahead. Don't guess. Earl always said the second you guess, you stop looking. And the thing you're looking for is always hiding right past where you quit. Who's Earl? Calvin picked up his scanner, an old one, years out of date, the kind the fancy shops would have laughed at, and plugged it into the port under the dash. Earl Whitmore, man who taught me the trade, man who taught me everything near about. He watched the little screen wake up. He owned this shop before me. Took me on when I was 17 and mean and had no daddy to speak of, and figured the whole world was against me. Which, a small, tired smile, the whole world kind of was. But Earl didn't care what I was on the outside. He put a wrench in my hand and he said, "Boy, a engine doesn't know if you're rich or poor or black or white. A engine only knows if you're listening or if you're lying. You gonna listen or you gonna lie?" Calvin tapped the scanner. "I've been listening for 20 years. And where's Earl now?" The smile went away. "Cemetery on Route 9, Calvin said. 4 years this spring. Left me the shop and a stack of debt and the best thing anybody ever gave me, which was somebody believing I was worth something before I believed it myself." He watched the code start to scroll. You ever have that? Somebody see something in you before you saw it? Camille Ashford was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "I built what I built alone." Calvin studied the screen. "That's a shame. And it explains a couple things about you, if you don't mind me saying." "I do mind. Figured you would." He leaned in. "Here's your codes. Same as the last 3 shops I'd bet money. Misfire detected, cylinder bank flagged intermittent, cleared itself, came back, cleared itself. See how it keeps clearing? That's why the computer says the car's fine. Because by the time it looks, the problem's already gone. And then, 3 seconds later, it's back. Your engineers looked at this and saw a ghost. So they did what people do with ghosts they can't catch. They said it wasn't real. Told you the car was fine. It's not fine. No, it isn't. But I understand why they said so." Calvin unplugged the scanner. "A machine that only tells you it's fine hasn't been asked the right way. You gotta catch it in the act, which means I gotta get it to stumble while I'm watching the right thing at the right second. And that..." He stood cracked. His back glanced at the light coming through the bay door. "That's gonna take patience, which is the one thing I got plenty of and the one thing you got none of. So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna sit down over there in that chair and you're gonna let me work. And every so often, you're gonna want to hurry me, and every time you do, I'm gonna work slower. Understand? Every time you push, I slow down. It's the only way I know how to teach a person like you to leave a man alone." Camille stared at him. In 3 years of running a company, in a lifetime of getting exactly what she demanded, exactly when she demanded it, no one had spoken to her like that. Not once. "You don't get to give me orders," she said. "In here, I do. In here, this is the one place in the world where the money in your pocket doesn't mean a thing, and the thing in my hands means everything. You want your car fixed by sunset. This is the price. Sit down, Miss Ashford." And to her own visible astonishment, Calvin watched it happen on her face, the war between the person she'd made herself into and the desperate need underneath it. Camille Ashford walked to the folding chair against the wall, and she sat. "Good," Calvin said softly. "Now let me listen." He went to work. For the next hour, he was methodical in a way that would have driven the dealership techs out of their minds. He didn't swap a single part. He traced. He followed the harness by hand connector to connector, feeling each one tugging gently, watching the idle on his old scanner for the slightest twitch. He wiggled wires and watched the RPM. He warmed the engine and cooled it and warmed it again. He talked low, mostly to himself, mostly to the car, and Camille sat in the folding chair and, against every instinct she owned, found herself listening. "Come on now," Calvin murmured to the engine hands deep in the bay. "You showed me you got a rhythm. Show me where it lives. I'm not gonna hurt you. I just gotta find the little thing." His voice was gentle, almost tender, the same voice he used on Micah when the coughing wouldn't stop. "There's always a little thing. Everybody looks for the big thing. Big broken part, big expensive fix. But it's never the big thing that gets you. It's the little thing everybody stepped right over. Is that a philosophy? Camille asked from the chair. Calvin didn't look up. It's just true. You want a philosophy? Ask a professor. I fix cars. You talk like a professor. I talk like a man who's had a lot of quiet hours to think. He shifted, followed a wire down behind the engine where his hand barely fit. You spend enough time under a hood with nobody to talk to, you figure a few things out. About machines, about people. They're not that different in the end. Both of them break in a place you can't see. Both of them make a noise before they quit, and everybody ignores the noise till it's too late. He grunted, reaching. Both of them got a little thing wrong down deep that everybody around them decided to overlook because the little thing was too small to matter, right up until it was the only thing that mattered. Camille didn't say anything for a while. Then quietly, "You're talking about your son." Calvin's hands went still in the engine. "His heart," she went on, and her voice had changed. Some of the ice gone out of it, replaced by something that was maybe just curiosity, but sounded for a second like something warmer. A hole, a little thing, too small to see for years, and then one day it was the only thing that mattered. Calvin pulled his hands out of the engine bay slowly. He turned around and looked at the young woman in the folding chair, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. "Yeah," he said finally. "The doctors, when they found it, Micah was 5, healthy-looking boy, running around playing, and they did a routine checkup, and they heard something. A little sound. A murmur. And I remember the doctor put that stethoscope on my boy's chest, and she went quiet. Real quiet. The way I go quiet over an engine, and I knew. I knew before she said a word. Because I recognized it. That's a man listening for the little thing. I've been that man my whole life. I just never thought I'd be on the other side of it watching somebody listen to my son." He swallowed. 5 years old. And there was this little thing wrong down deep, this little hole. And it had been there since before he was born, and nobody knew. And now it's the only thing that matters. You're right. That's exactly what it's like. "How long does he have?" Camille asked. "Without the surgery." "Don't ask me that. I'm asking." Calvin looked at her, and his jaw worked, and when he spoke it came out rough. "A year, maybe. The arrhythmia, the rhythm problem, it's getting worse. His heart works too hard just to do the regular things a heart does. Just to let him walk to the bus. He can't run anymore. You know what that does to a father to watch his 8-year-old boy learn to stop running because running hurts his heart. You know what that—" He stopped. He turned back to the engine. His shoulders were tight. "I'm not doing this. I'm not standing in my own shop crying in front of a stranger who researched my dying son so she could get a discount on a mechanic. I'm not giving you that." The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. "I didn't research him for a discount," Camille said. "No, then why?" "Because I needed to know if you were the kind of man who'd actually solve my problem." A pause. "But that was before I met you. And now I've met you, and I've watched you talk to a car like it's a person, and to me like I'm a machine, and I—" She stopped. She seemed unused to the sentence she was in the middle of, like she'd walked into a room and forgotten why. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Then don't," Calvin said, not unkindly. "You don't owe me your soul. You offered me a deal, a cold one. Let's keep it cold, and both of us come out okay. You get your car, I get my boy's surgery, and tomorrow you forget this street exists, just like you said. That's cleaner. That's easier. Let's do it that way." He went back into the engine. But something had shifted in the garage, and they both knew it, and neither of them named it. 20 minutes later, Calvin found the first real clue. "There," he breathed. "There you are. Wiggle right there. Come here, look at this." Camille was up out of the chair before she'd decided to move. "Watch the number." Calvin nodded at the scanner propped on the fender. "Watch it while I touch this. Right here, this connector back behind the intake." He reached in, laid one finger on a black plastic plug, half hidden in the harness, and pressed. "Watch." The idol dipped. just barely. The number on the old scanner twitched down and came back. You see that? I saw it. That's the neighborhood, that connector or something feeding it. When I press it, the car flinches. That means somewhere in there there's a connection that's almost good. Almost. Good enough to work most of the time, bad enough to hiccup a few times a minute. Calvin sat back on his heels, and for the first time all afternoon, there was something bright and alive in his face, the look of a man who has found the thread and is about to start pulling. The dealership never found this because you gotta press it just right at just the right second while you're watching the right number. Their machine does the watching for them. But their machine doesn't have fingers. It can't reach in and feel the car flinch. That's the difference between a computer and a man. A computer knows 1,000 things. A man knows how to feel one thing at exactly the right time. So that's it, that connector. No. Calvin held up a grease-stained finger. That's the neighborhood. It is not the house. I told you, you guess you stopped looking. I know the problem lives on this street. Now I gotta go door to door till I find which house it's in. Could be the connector's dirty. Could be a pin backed out. Could be a wire chafed through behind it. Could be the connector's fine, and it's something downstream that just happens to shake when I press here. He was already reaching for a smaller light, a probe, a pick. This is the part that takes forever. This is the part nobody's got the patience for. Everybody wants to hear me say, it's the connector, $400 done. But if I swap that connector, and it wasn't the connector you drive off, it stumbles on camera tomorrow, and my boy... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Camille looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 4. The light in the bay had gone gold and long. You have less than 3 hours, she said. And to her credit, it didn't come out like a threat this time. It came out almost like worry. I know exactly how much time I have, Calvin said quietly. I've been counting down to a deadline for 4 months. I'm real good at deadlines now. He bent back to the harness. Sit down, Miss Ashford, and do me a favor. While I work, talk to me. Talk to you about what? Anything, everything. I do better with a voice in the room. 20 years alone in here, I got used to talking to Earl even after he was gone. A voice keeps my hand steady. He didn't look up. Tell me about your company. The thing you're presenting tomorrow. The thing that dies if this car stumbles. And maybe it was the strangeness of the day, or the gold light, or the fact that she was underneath all that armor, a young woman under a crushing weight, who had also not had anyone to talk to in a very long time. But Camille Ashford sat back down in the folding chair, and she talked. It's a medical device company, she said. That's the part nobody expects. They see the car and the suit, and they assume I sell software or run a hedge fund. It's cardiac monitoring, implantable devices, sensors that watch a heart in real time and catch an arrhythmia before it kills someone. She laughed, short and humorless. You want to hear something funny? I've been sitting here for 2 hours listening to you talk about finding the little thing wrong with a heart before it's the only thing that matters, and that is literally my entire company. That's the whole product, catching the little thing early. Calvin's hand slowed. You make heart monitors, he said, for adults mostly. The pediatric line is, it's the thing I'm presenting tomorrow. It's 3 years of my life. It's every dollar I have and a great many dollars I don't. It's a device small enough and smart enough to monitor a child's heart continuously at home and alert a hospital the second something changes. So that a kid with a... She stopped. She'd heard where the sentence was going a half second before she got there. So that a kid with a heart condition doesn't have to wait for the once-a-year checkup where they happen to catch the murmur. So that nobody's little thing has to become the only thing. The garage was very quiet. Calvin turned around slowly. You're telling me, he said, that the thing you're presenting tomorrow, the thing that dies if your car breaks down, is a machine that would have caught my son's heart 3 years sooner. Camille couldn't hold his eyes. She looked at the concrete floor. If it had existed when he was 2, she said quietly. And if he'd had one, yes, it would have caught it, years earlier, before the arrhythmia got this bad. He might not need the big surgery at all. He might have needed a small procedure at 4 instead of a large one at 8. She finally looked up. I didn't know that when I drove up here, Mr. Reed. I swear to you, I didn't. I researched a mechanic with a sick kid and a money problem. I did not know his kid was sick with the exact thing my company exists to prevent. I found that out an hour ago sitting in that chair listening to you, and I have been sitting here ever since trying to figure out what to do with it. Calvin set his tools down on the fender one by one slow. That's a heck of a thing, he said. It's a heck of a thing. You built a machine to save kids like mine, and you drove it to my shop to threaten me with mine. Yes. She didn't flinch from it. That was the thing about her. Calvin was starting to understand she never flinched from the ugly truth of herself, and it was maybe the only thing about her he could respect. Yes, that's exactly what I did. And an hour ago I'd have told you it was smart, efficient. I found a desperate man, and I gave him a reason to try. That's just how I operate. That's how I built everything I have. And now I'm sitting in a broken folding chair in a garage that smells like oil, and I've been listening to you talk to a car for 2 hours, and I feel... She stopped. Her hands were tight in her lap. I feel like I don't like the person who drove up here. I've never felt that before. I've never once in my life looked at how I do things and felt like I didn't like it. And I don't know what to do with that feeling. So I'm telling you because you're the only one here and because you told me to talk. Calvin looked at her for a long moment. You want to know what to do with it, he said. Tell me. Sit with it. Don't fix it. Don't make it into a plan. Don't make it efficient. Don't spin it into something that makes you feel better. Just sit in the chair and let it be uncomfortable. He picked his probe back up. That's what a little thing does, Miss Ashford. When you first feel it, it's real small. Easy to ignore. Easy to talk yourself out of. And you've spent your whole life being real good at talking yourself out of the small, uncomfortable things, I'd guess because that's how you got the car, and the company, and the suit. But every so often, the little thing you feel is the truest thing about you, and if you step over it, like everybody steps over everything, you'll spend your whole life wondering why the machine keeps stumbling. He bent back to the engine. You feel bad about how you treated me good. Feel it. Don't you dare fix it yet. Just feel it. And let me find your fuse. Camille sat in the folding chair, and she felt it. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't try to make the feeling into anything at all. She just let it hurt. Calvin worked. He went down the harness pin by pin. He found the connector clean. He found the pins seated. He traced the wire away from the neighborhood, following it with his fingers behind the engine, along the block, down toward the fuse and relay center. And every few minutes, he'd press somewhere and glance at the scanner, and shake his head and move on. 4:15 became 4:40. The gold light in the bay went deeper gold. Outside, a couple of men from the tire shop, 2 doors down, had drifted over to lean on the fence and watch the way men gather when there's a fancy car in a poor man's garage and a story unfolding. He ain't gonna find nothin', Calvin heard one of them say not quietly enough. 3 dealerships couldn't. Reed thinks he's smarter than the dealership that's rich. Man's just trying to run out the clock so he can charge her for the hours, said the other. Ain't no shame in it. Lady's got money to burn. Calvin's jaw tightened, but he didn't look up. He'd heard worse. He'd hear worse tomorrow. But Camille heard it too, and she stood up out of the folding chair and walked to the open bay door, and Calvin heard her voice go out across the lot, cold and flat, and absolutely certain in a way that could stop a room. He's found more in 2 hours than your dealership found in 6 weeks, she said. So unless one of you would like to come reach into a $2 million engine and do better, I'd suggest you keep your commentary to yourselves. The man is working. Let him work. The men at the fence went quiet. Calvin, deep in the engine bay, allowed himself the smallest smile. You didn't have to do that, he said when she came back. I know I didn't. They're not wrong to doubt me. Everybody doubts me. I'm used to it. I don't need defending. Maybe not. Camille sat back down. But I've spent all afternoon watching people who are wrong get treated like they're right because they've got certificates on the wall, and watching a man who's right get treated like he's nothing because he doesn't. And I'm tired of it. I've been part of it my whole life. I think I'd like to be on the other side of it for one afternoon. She folded her hands. Keep working, Mr. Reed. Don't mind me, I'm just sitting here feeling my little thing. Calvin laughed, a real one, surprised out of him the first real laugh he'd had in days, and it rang out in the garage, strange and warm. All right, he said. All right then. And he pulled the wire down toward the fuse box, and his fingers reached the fuse center, and something under his hand felt just slightly, almost imperceptibly, not right. And his whole body went still, the way it went still when a doctor's stethoscope went still on his son's chest. Miss Ashford, he said quietly. Come here. She was beside him in an instant. What is it? I don't know yet, but I want a witness. He reached in, and his fingertips found the small housing of the fuse block, and he pressed gently one finger on the row of fuses and glanced at the scanner. The idol dipped, came back, dipped. Right here, Calvin breathed. It's right here. It's not the connector. It's not the harness. It's not the software. It's not any of the $10,000 answers those men gave you. It's right here in this fuse block. Something in here is barely holding on. Something so small the computer can't see it, and the eye can't see it, and only a finger pressing at exactly the right second can catch it flinching. He looked up at her, and his face was lit up now, alive 20 years of being doubted, burning off him like morning fog. You wanted to know if a man like me can do what your engineers couldn't. Grab that light. Hold it steady right here. We're about to find your ghost. Camille took the light. Her hand, he noticed, was not quite steady either. Hold it right there, Calvin said. Don't move. And whatever I pull out of this car in the next 5 minutes, you remember it. You remember exactly what it looks like. Because I've got a feeling it's going to be the smallest, cheapest, most overlooked little thing you ever saw in your life. And I've got a feeling it's going to change the way you look at everything. He reached in past the light into the fuse block toward the one thing in that whole magnificent machine that everybody smarter and richer and more respected than him had stepped right over. Now hold that light steady and let me show you what listening looks like. Calvin's fingers closed around the first fuse and he did not pull it. Hold the light, he said again, quieter now, the way a man lowers his voice in church. I'm not going to yank the whole block. That's what the dealership would do. Rip it all out, throw parts at it, bill you for the guessing. No, I'm going to go one at a time. Every fuse, every relay one at a time, and I'm going to check each one, and I'm going to set it back exactly where it came from. Because the one that's wrong is going to look almost exactly like every one that's right. And if I get sloppy, if I rush, I'll walk right past it, same as everybody else did. How long will that take? Long as it takes. Calvin eased the first fuse out, held it up to the light in her hand, turned it slow between two grease-blackened fingers. This one's good. See the little metal strip inside solid. No burn, no crack, no pull away at the legs. Good. He seated it back. His hands were doing the delicate work now, and Camille watched them, and thought unbidden that she had never once in her life watched anyone do anything with that much care. Next, she held the light. He worked. And for a while, neither of them spoke, and the only sounds were the tick of the compressor and the low idle of the Bentley and the men still murmuring somewhere out at the fence. Can I ask you something? Camille said when he was 4 fuses in. You're paying by the sunset, not the question. Ask. Your wife. She said it carefully, testing the ice. You mentioned a ring. You were going to sell a ring today before I came. Calvin's hands paused just for a second over the fuse block. You did your research, he said. You already know. I know she passed. I don't know how. And I've spent the afternoon deciding you're not what I thought you were, so I'd like to know the real thing instead of the file. Calvin pulled the next fuse. Held it to the light. Good. Set it back. Dana, he said. Her name was Dana. We had 6 years. Micah was 3 when she got sick. His voice was even worn smooth, the voice of a man who has told a hard story enough times that it no longer cuts him on the way out, or has learned to pretend it doesn't. It was fast. That's the mercy people tell you anyway. At least it was fast. 4 months from the day the doctor said the word to the day He stopped, pulled a fuse, held it up. Good. Set it back. 4 months. Same as Micah's countdown now, come to think of it. Everything in my life comes in 4 months. 4 months to lose her. 4 months I've been waiting to save him. He shook his head slow. I don't know what to do with a number like that, so I just fix cars. Was it? Cancer, yeah. The kind you don't catch till it's already everywhere. He glanced at her, and there was no accusation in it, only a terrible tired clarity. The little thing again. There it was in her the whole time, small, growing, and nobody listening close enough to hear it. By the time anybody put a stethoscope on that, it was already the only thing. Same story, always the same story. That's why I do it the way I do it, Miss Ashford. That's why I go slow, why I listen, why I don't guess. Because I know exactly what it costs when the little thing gets missed. I've paid it. I'm still paying it. He pulled the next fuse. I buried the woman I loved because the world caught her too late. And now I'm 4 months from maybe burying my boy for the same reason, and everybody keeps handing me machines and printouts and telling me the thing that's killing the people I love isn't there. So forgive me if I don't trust the machines. Forgive me if I'd rather use my hands. Camille was silent for a long moment. The light in her hand had a faint tremor now. I'm sorry, she said. And then, like it surprised her, I mean that. I don't say that to people. It's usually a word you say to make a conversation end. But I mean it. I'm sorry about Dana. And I'm sorry I came here today the way I came. You keep apologizing for the coming, because it keeps getting worse the longer I sit here. She laughed short and bitter at herself. You know what the truly awful part is? I built a company on the promise of catching the little thing early. I stand on stages and I tell rooms full of investors that too many people die because the warning signs get ignored. And then I drove to a man whose wife died of a missed warning sign and whose son is dying of one, and I used his son as leverage. I'm the villain in my own commercial, Mr. Reed. I'm the exact thing my company exists to fight. And I never saw it. Because nobody was ever quiet long enough to make me sit still and hear the little wrong thing in me. Her jaw tightened. You did that. In 2 hours. In a garage. You should send me a bill for that too. Calvin actually smiled, though he didn't look up. No charge, he said. That one's on the house. He pulled the next fuse, held it to the light, and stopped. Camille felt it before she saw it. Felt his whole body change, the way you feel the air change before a storm. His hands, which had been moving in that steady, unhurried rhythm for 20 minutes, went completely still. He didn't breathe. He turned the fuse a half degree in the light, and then another half degree squinting, and then he said very softly in a voice with something holy in it, Well, I'll be. What? What is it? Hold the light closer, right here. Don't shake. Calvin brought the fuse in close to both their faces, and Camille leaned in, and at first she saw nothing. A small plastic fuse blew, identical to the dozen he'd already checked, and put back the metal strip inside. Intact, no burn, no melt, nothing. I don't see anything, she said. It looks fine. It looks like all the others. Keep looking. Right there where the metal leg meets the little bridge. See it? She looked. And looked. And then, so small, she'd have sworn she was imagining it. She saw the thing his eye had caught, a hairline. A crack so fine, it was barely a suggestion of a crack, a whisper of a fracture at the base of the metal element, where it met the leg invisible, unless the light hit it at exactly the angle Calvin's 20 years had taught his hands to find. Is that? She breathed. That tiny line. That tiny line. Calvin's voice was hushed with something like reverence. That's a hairline fracture. The metal's cracked, but just barely, not all the way through. So most of the time the current jumps the gap and everything works fine. The car runs, the computer's happy, everybody's happy. But every so often when the engine vibrates just right, when it heats up, just right, when the crack opens up by the width of a human hair, the current can't jump, and the circuit drops for a fraction of a second, and one cylinder loses what it needs, and the whole engine gives that little stumble. He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet and shining, and 35 years of being told he was nothing burned in them like a furnace. 3 seconds later, the metal shifts back, the crack closes, current jumps again, and the car runs perfect. And by the time the computer looks to see what went wrong, it's already fixed itself. There's your ghost. Miss Ashford. There's the thing 3 dealerships and a team of engineers and $100,000 of machine could not find. Camille stared at the tiny cracked fuse in his fingers. That's it, she said. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. That broken little... She couldn't seem to finish. How much does that cost? That fuse, to replace it. Calvin turned it once more in the light, almost gently, the way you'd hold something precious. 12 cents, he said. Maybe 15. I buy 'em by the 100. There's a box of 'em on the shelf right behind you. He let out a long breath, and it shook coming out. A 12-cent part. That's what beat your engineers. That's what almost cost you your company. A 12-cent part with a crack in it too small to see sitting right where nobody thought to look, because everybody was busy looking for a big, expensive, complicated answer to match the big, expensive, complicated car. He set the fuse down carefully on the fender, apart from the other's evidence testimony. But the car didn't have a big, expensive, complicated problem. It had a little thing. It always was a little thing. It's always a little thing. For a moment, neither of them moved. And then Camille Ashford, 25 years old, worth more money than most men see in 10 lifetimes, sat down hard on Calvin's rolling stool because her legs had gone strange under her, and she put her face in her hands, and Calvin realized with a jolt that she was crying. "Hey now," he said, alarmed. "Hey, what's it's fixed, or it's about to be? This is the good part. Why are you? Because you found it in 2 hours." Her voice came muffled through her hands, and it cracked, and everything cold and certain and armored about her cracked right along with it. 2 hours, with your fingers and a flashlight and a $30 scanner. And they had everything. They had every tool and every certificate and every advantage, and they looked right at it, and they told me it wasn't there, and you knew. You knew the second you heard the engine that it was a little thing hiding, and you were right, and I... She lowered her hands and looked at him, and her mascara had run, and her voice was raw, and she looked for the first time all day exactly as young as she was. I almost didn't come in. Did you know that I sat in the car outside your shop for 10 minutes reading your file, looking at the peeling paint, and I almost told my driver to keep going. I almost decided a man like you couldn't possibly help me. And if I'd trusted the paint and the file instead of coming in, I'd have driven to the flagship service center tonight, and they'd have found nothing just like everyone else, and I'd have stumbled on that stage tomorrow, and I'd have lost everything. Because I judged a book by its cover, which is the thing I have done to every single person I've ever met, and it has never once cost me until today, and today it almost cost me everything, and the only reason it didn't is that I got desperate enough to walk into the one shop I'd already decided was beneath me. Calvin crouched down in front of the stool so they were eye to eye the way he crouched for Micah. "Miss Ashford, Camille," he paused. "Camille, listen to me. You want to cry about the almost, that's your business. But I want you to hear something first because I think you need to hear it, and I don't think anybody's ever told you." He waited until she was looking at him. "The reason those men couldn't find it isn't that they're dumb. Some of them are probably real smart. It's that they stopped looking. The machine told them it was fine, and they believed the machine because believing the machine was easier than staying humble enough to keep searching. And you almost drove past me for the same reason. The file told you I was nothing, and believing the file was easier than staying humble enough to walk in and find out. It's the same sin, Camille. It's the same exact sin. Trusting the easy answer over the hard truth. And it near about killed your company today, the same way it near about kills everything." He picked the cracked fuse up off the fender and pressed it into her hand, folded her fingers around it. "So here, you keep that. 12-cent fuse with a crack you can't hardly see. You put it somewhere you'll look at it. And every time you're about to judge a person by their cover, or trust a machine over your own 2 eyes, or drive past somebody because they got peeling paint, You take that fuse out, and you remember the day a man you almost didn't let touch your car found the thing your whole empire missed. You do that, and this 12-cent part will be worth more than everything else you own. You understand me? Camille looked down at the fuse in her closed hand.
Yeah,
She whispered.
yeah.
I understand. Good. Calvin stood and his knees cracked and he wiped his hands on the rag. Now dry your face. You got mascara clear down to your chin, and I'm about to make history, and you're gonna want to see it clean. She laughed through the tears, wet and startled and real, and wiped her face with the back of her wrist, smearing it worse, and Calvin handed her a shop towel that was only mostly clean, and she took it. This woman in a suit, worth more than his truck, and she pressed a mechanic's rag to her face and didn't care. Now watch, Calvin said. He reached to the shelf behind her, opened a small plastic organizer bin, and from a compartment of 100 identical little fuses, he took a single one. Blue. Perfect. 12 cents. He held it up to the light, turned it, checked the metal strip solid hole, no whisper of a crack, and nodded. This one's good. This one's honest. He crouched to the fuse block. Hold the light one more time. Steady. This is the whole ball game right here. Camille held the light, and Calvin Reed in his oil-stained coveralls with his split knuckle and his $90 and his dying boy and his dead wife's ring still unsold in his pocket, seated a 12-cent fuse into a $2 million machine with the gentleness of a man tucking in a child. It clicked home. There, he breathed. There you go. Welcome back. He stood. He wiped his hands one more time, slow, ceremonial. He looked at the Bentley still idling with its faint, sick stumble, and then he looked at Camille, and something passed between them that neither of them would ever fully be able to name, two people from opposite ends of the whole world who never should have met standing over an engine in the gold end of an afternoon. Both of them changed. You want to do the honors? Calvin asked. Or should I? I don't understand. The engine's been running the whole time. New fuses in. If I'm right, and I'm right, the stumble's already gone. But the real test is a full restart. Shut her down, wake her up cold, and listen. If she comes up clean with no catch, no hitch, no ghost, then I earned it. And you write that check to St. Aloysius. He held out the key fob he'd picked up off the floor 2 hours and a lifetime ago. So, you want to turn the key on the thing that just changed both our lives, or you want an old grease monkey to do it for you? Camille looked at the fob in his outstretched hand. You do it, she said. You found it. You should be the one. Her voice caught. And Calvin, whatever the engine does when you turn that key, the check's already yours. I decided that 10 minutes ago, whether the fuse works or not. I'm covering Micah's surgery either way. I should have offered it that way from the start. As a person, not a wager. I'm sorry it took me all afternoon to become someone who'd do that. Calvin went very still. You don't have to do that, he said low. The deal was the deal. Fix it and you pay. I don't want your pity money. I fix things. I earn things. That's the only thing I've got left is that I earn what I get. It's not pity. Camille stood up off the stool, and she squared her shoulders, and for a moment, Calvin could see the woman she was going to become, instead of the one who'd driven up someone the same iron pointed somewhere better. It's justice. There's a difference, and you of all people should know it, because you've spent your whole life not getting either one. You earned this 3 times over the second you heard that stumble and refused to guess. The check isn't a gift. It's the bill finally coming to the right person. Now turn the key. Calvin, please, I want to hear it. I want to hear what it sounds like when the little thing is finally fixed. Calvin Reed looked at her for a long, long moment. Then he nodded once, and he walked around to the driver's door of the Bentley, and he reached in, and his thumb found the ignition, and he thought about Dana, and he thought about Earl, and he thought about a boy at home with a bird's heartbeat who had taught himself not to run, and he thought about a 12-cent fuse with a crack too small to see, and he pressed the button and killed the engine. The garage went silent, dead silent. The men at the fence had stopped talking. The compressor had cycled off. The whole world seemed to lean in the way it had leaned in 2 hours ago, When a stranger said his son's name, except this time it wasn't dread in the air. It was something else, something with its breath held. Calvin's thumb hovered over the button. "Come on now," he whispered to the car, to God, to whoever was listening in the gold light. "Come up clean, come up honest, for my boy, come on." And he pressed the button. The engine caught, turned over once, and came up. And it came up clean. There was no stumble, no hitch, no half-beat catch buried under the tune. The 12-cylinder engine of the black Bentley rose from silence into a smooth, unbroken, perfect purr. The sound of money doing exactly what money is supposed to do, and it held there even and endless, without a single flaw in it, like a heart that had finally found its rhythm. Calvin didn't move. He stood at the open door with his thumb still on the button and his head tilted the way it had been tilted 2 hours ago, listening. And Camille watched his face and saw the exact moment he was sure. "There it is," he breathed. "You hear that? You hear what's not there?" "I don't hear anything. That's the point." A slow smile broke across his face, and it kept breaking wider until 20 years of doubt cracked right off him. "You don't hear the stumble because there is no stumble. She's clean. She's honest. Listen to her. That's a happy car, Camille. That's the sound of a car that's not working hard to sound happy anymore. She just is." Camille stood very still, holding the 12-cent fuse in her closed fist, listening to a $2 million machine run perfectly for the first time in 7 weeks, because a man everyone had dismissed had reached in with his fingers and found a crack too small for the whole world to see. And then, out at the fence, one of the tire shop men said in a voice gone strange and quiet, "No way. That thing was stumbling all afternoon. I heard it." "It ain't stumbling now," said the other. "Rev it." The first one called out louder, stepping off the fence, coming closer despite himself. "Hey, Reed, rev it, prove it. Anybody can idle." Calvin looked at Camille. Camille looked at Calvin. "Go ahead," she said. "Rev it, let them hear." Calvin leaned in and pressed the pedal with his hand, and the engine climbed smooth, effortless, that magnificent 12-cylinder swell, rising up and up without a hitch or a break anywhere in it. A clean, unbroken wall of sound. And then he let it fall back down to idle, soft as settling. And the silence that followed was the silence of men who had just watched something they'd sworn couldn't happen. The tire shop man who'd asked for the rev just stood there in the middle of the lot with his mouth slightly open. "That's," he started. "How'd he? The dealership had it for weeks." The dealership had a machine," Camille said, and her voice carried across the whole lot, now clear and cold and certain, but pointed for once at the right target. "This man had ears, and he was right and they were wrong, and every one of you standing at that fence spent the afternoon telling each other he couldn't do it while he was doing it. So take a good look. Because you just watched a man you decided was worthless do the thing your certified experts couldn't. Remember that. Remember it the next time you decide what somebody's worth by looking at their paint." Nobody at the fence said a word. One by one, they drifted back to their own shops, and more than one of them looked back over his shoulder at Calvin Reed as he went, and the look was different than it had been that morning. It was the look men give a thing they've decided too late to respect. Calvin killed the engine again. Clean shutdown. Clean silence. And he straightened up out of the car, and he had to put one hand on the fender because his legs had gone loose. "You all right?" Camille was beside him. "I don't—" He laughed, shaky. "I've fixed 10,000 cars, Camille. 10,000, and I don't think I ever—" He stopped. He pressed the back of his wrist to his eyes hard, and when he brought it down, his eyes were wet, and he didn't care who saw. "It was never about the car. You know that, right? I've been standing here all afternoon fixing your engine, but the whole time, every second, I was Micah. It was Micah. Every fuse I pulled, I was thinking, this is the one that saves him. This is the one, and now it's—" His voice broke clean in half. "Now it's done, and he's gonna get his surgery. My boy's gonna get his surgery. After 4 months of that phone ringing, and me not being able to, and now—" He couldn't finish. He turned away, one hand still on the fender of the car that had changed everything, and Calvin Reed, who had not cried in front of another living soul since the day he buried his wife, stood in the middle of his failing garage in the gold end of the afternoon, and wept. Not the quiet, controlled leak of a man holding himself together, but the deep, heaving, whole-body crying of a man who had been holding a thing so heavy for so long that setting it down took his legs out from under him. Camille didn't say anything. She didn't try to fix it, didn't try to make it efficient, didn't spin it into anything at all. She just did the thing she'd told herself all afternoon she'd forgotten how to do. She put one hand on his shoulder. This man she'd threatened 3 hours ago, and she let him cry, and she stood with him while he did it. "Let it out," she said quietly. "You've been carrying it alone long enough. Let it out. Micah's safe. You did it. He's safe." "He's safe," Calvin repeated, like he was learning the shape of the words. "He's safe. Oh God, he's safe." It took a while. She let it take a while. When he finally straightened, wiped his face with the shop rag, and let out a long, ragged breath, the light through the bay door had gone from gold to amber, the sun sliding down toward the rooftops. It had been racing all afternoon. "Look at that," Calvin said, nodding toward the light, his voice still thick. "Sun's still up. I beat your deadline. Made it with what, an hour to spare?" "You made it with more than an hour to spare." Camille almost smiled. "You made it about 2 hours ago. The rest was just you being thorough." "The rest was me being right." He managed a wet grin. "There's a difference." And then his face changed. Some thought crossing it, dimming it, and he looked at the Bentley, and he looked at Camille, and he asked the question he'd been not asking for 2 hours. "The check," he said. "St. Aloysius. You said either way, but I need to, Camille. I need it to be real. I need to know it's real because there's a slot at that hospital with my son's name on it, and it's got 2 weeks, and they need the deposit, or they give it to the next kid on the list. And I can't drive home tonight and tell Micah it's fixed if it's not really. Give me your phone." "What?" "Your phone. The one that keeps ringing. Give it to me." She held out her hand. "The billing office at St. Aloysius. You've got the number. I know you do. A man doesn't get that many calls from a hospital without the number burning a hole in his phone." Calvin pulled his phone from the pocket of his coveralls, found the number Denise from billing called 4 times just that week, and handed it over, and his hand was shaking again, and this time he didn't try to hide it. Camille pressed the number. She put it on speaker and set it on the fender between them, and it rang once, twice, and then a tired, kind voice answered. "St. Aloysius billing, this is Denise." "Denise," Camille said, and her voice shifted into something Calvin hadn't heard from her all day. The CEO voice, the boardroom voice, the voice that moved money and made rooms full of powerful people sit up straight. "My name is Camille Ashford. I'm calling regarding a patient, Micah Reed. He's 8 years old, scheduled for a cardiac procedure. There's an outstanding deposit holding the surgical date. Do you have his file in front of you?" A pause. Keys clicking. Yes, I have Micah's file. May I ask are you family or? I'm the person who's paying for his surgery, in full, today." Camille's eyes stayed on Calvin's face while she spoke, watching what her words did to him. "The full outstanding amount is $51,400, is that correct?" Another pause longer. When Denise spoke again, her voice had changed. Yes, that's correct. Ma'am, I've been trying to reach Mr. Reed about this deposit for weeks. Are you saying? I'm saying I want to wire the full amount today right now before you close. Not the deposit, the entire cost. The procedure, the recovery, the specialist, anything else on that file. Whatever it takes to get Micah Reed's surgery scheduled at the earliest possible date and taken off any waiting list permanently. Can you send me the wire instructions and release that date this afternoon? There was a sound on the other end of the line that Calvin recognized because he'd heard it that very morning. The sound of Denise from billing a woman neither of them had ever met starting to cry. "Ma'am," she said, her voice wet and cracking. "Ma'am, I have been doing this job for 11 years, and I have made that call to that man 4 times this month, and every single time he thanks me. He thanks me for calling to tell him he can't afford to save his son. Do you know how I go home and I can't, and you're telling me—" She stopped, gathered herself. Yes, I can release the date. I can send the wire instructions right now. Oh, thank God." Oh, thank God, that little boy. Calvin sat down. He just sat down right there on the concrete floor of his own garage, back against the fender of the Bentley, and he put his face in his hands, and his shoulders shook. Denise, Camille said gently, now the boardroom voice softening. One more thing. Whatever the earliest surgical date is, I want you to move heaven and earth to make it as soon as possible. This family has waited long enough. And Denise, the way you just talked about that little boy, the way you clearly care about a family you've only ever spoken to on the phone, the world needs more of whatever you've got. Don't let this job take it out of you. You hear me? Don't let it. I won't, Denise whispered. I won't. Thank you. Thank you both. I'll send those instructions right now, and I'll call Dr. Halloran's office the second we hang up about the date. Mr. Reed? Her voice reached out through the phone toward the man crumpled on the floor. Mr. Reed, if you can hear me, your boy's getting his surgery. It's happening. You did it. He did it, Calvin said, muffled from behind his hands. She did it. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, God bless you. They hung up. The garage was quiet again, but it was a different quiet now. A full quiet. The quiet after a storm has passed and left the air washed clean. Camille crouched down in front of Calvin, the way he'd crouched in front of her, the way he crouched for Micah. It's real, she said. It's done. The wire goes out within the hour. Micah has his date. It's real, Calvin. Calvin lowered his hands. His face was wrecked and streaked and shining, and he looked at this young woman crouched in front of him, in her expensive suit, gone dusty from his floor, and he said the only thing he could find. Why? He said. Just why? You could have paid the deal amount and driven off. You said it yourself this morning. Forget this street exists. That was the deal. Fix the car, get the money, never think about me again. Why are you paying the whole thing? Why are you crying on my floor? Why does it seem like it matters to you? It didn't matter to you at 2 o'clock. I watched it not matter to you. So why now? Camille was quiet for a moment. She turned the 12-cent fuse over in her fingers. Because at 2 o'clock, she said slowly, I was a person who'd never once been made to sit still. Do you understand I built everything I have by moving fast and judging faster and never ever stopping long enough to feel the thing underneath? It worked. It worked so well. I was 25, and I had the car and the company and the suit, and I decided that the way I did things was just correct, efficient, winning. She looked up at him. And then I walked into a garage I'd already decided was beneath me, and a man I'd already decided was nothing told me to sit down in a broken folding chair and be quiet. And I sat there for 2 hours, and for the first time in my whole life, somebody made me stop moving long enough to actually look at myself. And I did not like what I saw, Calvin. I saw a woman who was about to use a dying child as a bargaining chip and call it strategy. I saw a woman who almost drove past the only person in the city who could save her company because his paint was peeling. I saw a woman who built a company to catch the little thing early and had a heart with a crack in it she'd been stepping over her whole life. Her voice caught. You made me sit still. And when you make somebody sit still long enough, they hear the thing that's actually wrong. You did it to the car. You did it to me. Same skill. Same afternoon. Calvin looked at her. That's a heck of a thing to figure out in one afternoon, he said quietly. I had a good teacher. She almost smiled. He charges 12 cents. Calvin laughed, a real one, wrecked and warm, and he wiped his face and pushed himself up off the floor, and he held out his hand to help her up, and she took it. And for a second the CEO and the mechanic just stood there in the amber light. Hands clasped two people who had walked into the afternoon as enemies and were walking out of it as something there wasn't quite a word for yet. I have to go, Camille said, letting go of his hand, and there was reluctance in it. The presentation's at 9 tomorrow morning. I have to prep. 40 people deciding whether 3 years of my life survives. She looked at the Bentley running perfect, honest, clean. But I wanted to be sure before I left. About the surgery. About you. She paused. When is it Micah's surgery? Did Denise say? She's calling the doctor. But she said soon. As soon as they can. Calvin's voice went thick again. I get to go home tonight and tell my boy it's happening. Do you know what that's 4 months, Camille? 4 months I've been lying to that kid every morning, telling him not to worry about the money, and he's 8, and he's smart, and he knew I was lying, and tonight, I get to tell him the truth. Tonight, I get to tell him the truth is good. Then go tell him. Camille moved toward the Bentley, then stopped and turned back. Actually, no. Wait. Come here. What? Come here. Sit. She patted the fender. 2 more minutes. I want to talk to you about something, and I want to do it before I overthink it. Because I'm learning that the things I overthink are the things I talk myself out of, and I've decided I don't want to talk myself out of things anymore. She waited until he leaned against the fender beside her. Tell me about this shop. What about it? You said the bank owns half. You said you clear $90 on a good day. You said the dealership out by the interstate is killing you. She looked around the garage, the peeling paint, the 12-year-old compressor, the hand-lettered sign, the tow truck with the bad transmission. A man who can do what you just did should not be clearing $90 on a good day, Calvin. A man who can hear a hairline crack in a fuse that $100,000 of diagnostic equipment missed should not be 1 bad month away from selling his dead wife's ring. That's not a market working. That's a market that's broken. And I fix broken things too. Just bigger ones. Calvin went still. What are you saying? I'm saying... Camille stopped. Started again, more careful. I'm not going to make you a charity case. You told me you earn what you get, and I heard you, and I respect it more than you know. So this isn't charity. This is business, and I'm very good at business, and I know value when I finally learn to see it. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer, because I mean it as a real question and not a favor. She turned to face him fully. My company builds devices that catch the little thing early. Machines that listen to a heart the way you listen to an engine. And do you know what my single biggest problem is? Do you know what keeps me up at night? It's that my engineers build brilliant machines and then trust the machines completely. The exact sin you named this afternoon, the exact sin that almost killed me today. They stop listening. They believe the readout over the patient. And I have never, not once, in 3 years, had a single person in my entire company who does what you do, who refuses to guess, who goes slow, who reaches in with his own hands when the machine says everything's fine and says, no, I hear something, let me look closer. She held his eyes. I don't have that person, Calvin. And today I watched that person work for 2 hours, and he's leaning on a fender in a garage the bank half owns, about to sell his wife's ring. Is time. Calvin's throat worked. Camille, I'm not finished. I want you to come work for me. She said it fast before she could talk herself out of it. Not on the assembly line, not in a shop. I want you in my company teaching my engineers the thing you did to me this afternoon. How to sit still. How to listen. How to distrust the easy answer. How to find the little thing before it becomes the only thing. I don't have a title for it yet because the job doesn't exist yet. I'd be building it around you. But I'd pay you, Calvin. I'd pay you more in a month than this shop clears in a year, and I'd pay you honest, and you'd earn every cent. Because Lord knows my engineers need exactly what you've got. She stopped suddenly, unsure, suddenly younger. That's my offer, and this one's not a wager. There's no if. There's no sunset. It's just an offer. From one person who fixes broken things to another. Think about it. You don't have to answer now. Calvin stared at her. The garage was silent, except for the tick of the cooling engine. You're offering me a job, he said slowly. A real job. In your company. Because of a fuse. Because of how you found the fuse. Camille's voice was fierce now. Any idiot can replace a fuse once someone points at it. You found it, in a haystack of a machine that beat every expert in this city. That's not a skill I can hire off a resume, Calvin. I've tried. It's not on resumes. It's in a man who buried a wife and is fighting for a son and learned the hardest possible way that the little thing missed is the thing that kills you. You didn't learn patience in a classroom. You paid for it. And it turns out the thing you paid for is the exact thing my whole company is missing." She pushed off the fender, gathered herself, moved toward the car. "Just think about it. That's all I ask. I have to go save my company tomorrow morning, which I can only do because you saved it this afternoon. But when the dust settles, I'm going to call you, and I hope you say yes. For your sake, and for mine, and for every kid out there right now with a crack in their heart too small for my machines to catch. Who needs somebody in the building smart enough to keep looking anyway?" She got into the Bentley. The driver had long since given up and gone to sit in the front. Now he startled awake. Camille rolled down the rear window. "Calvin?" "Yeah, go home. Tell your boy the truth. Tell him the good truth." Her voice softened all the way down, all the ice gone, nothing left but the young woman underneath. "And put that fuse somewhere he can see it too. Someday, he's going to ask you how his surgery got paid for, and I hope you tell him it was a 12-cent part and a father who refused to guess. Because that's a better story than a rich lady wrote a check. The rich lady only wrote the check because your father made her sit still long enough to become someone who would." She almost smiled. "That's the story. Make sure he gets that one." And the Bentley pulled away from the curb, smooth, clean, perfect, not a stumble anywhere in it, and rolled off down the street into the last of the amber light, and Calvin Reed stood alone in the door of his garage and watched it go, holding a shop rag in one hand, and in his coverall pocket, a ring he was not going to have to sell after all. He stood there a long time. Then he went inside, and he closed up the shop, and he turned off the 12-year-old compressor, and he stood for a moment in front of the workbench where Micah's crayon drawing was still pinned. The two stick figures, the big one, and the small one holding hands under a lopsided sun. Under the hood. Me and Dad. Calvin touched the drawing with one grease-black finger. "We found the little thing, buddy," he whispered. "We found it. You're gonna be okay. Daddy found it." Then he got in his truck with the slipping transmission, and he drove home through the gathering dark to tell his son the good truth. The best truth he'd had to tell in 4 long months, that the countdown was over, that the phone calls were done, that the slot at the hospital was theirs and paid for, and real, and that a boy who had taught himself not to run was before very much longer going to get a heart that would finally let him. The truck rattled into the driveway just past 7, and before Calvin had even killed the engine, he could see Micah's face in the front window, small and pale and waiting. The way it always was, the way it had been for 4 months. Mrs. Okafor met him at the door. She'd been watching the boy after school since Dana passed, and she'd stopped charging him for it 2 months ago when she figured out how bad things had gotten, though neither of them ever said so out loud. "He ate half his dinner," she said quietly, pulling on her coat. "He's tired tonight, Calvin, more than usual. He didn't want to say, but I could see it." She paused in the doorway, studying his face. "Something's different about you. You look like a man who got news." Calvin swallowed. "I got news, Iyabo. Good news. The best news." Her eyes went wide and her hand came up to her mouth. "The surgery. It's paid for. All of it. It's happening. Soon." Mrs. Okafor didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stepped forward and pulled Calvin into a hug, fierce enough to crack ribs this small, strong woman who'd lost her own husband and buried more grief than most people carried in a lifetime. And she held him hard and whispered something in Yoruba that he didn't understand, but felt all the way down. "You go tell that boy," she said, pulling back her own eyes wet. "You go tell him right now. And Calvin, whoever it was that helped you, you thank God for them tonight. You thank God on your knees." "I will," Calvin said. "I already have. 12 times over." She left, and Calvin stood in the entryway of his small house, and he heard from the living room a small, tired voice call out, "Dad, is that you?" "It's me, buddy." He set down his keys. His heart was pounding harder than it had all afternoon, harder than when he'd turned the key on the Bentley, because this was the moment, this was the one that mattered. This was 4 months of lying every morning, finally coming to an end. "It's me. I'm coming. Micah was on the couch, wrapped in the blanket Dana had made before he was born. The only thing of hers Calvin had never once considered selling, and his lips had that faint blue at the edges, and there were shadows under his eyes, and he looked in the lamplight so much like his mother that it took Calvin's breath for a second the way it always did. "You're home late," Micah said, "even for fashionably late." I know, Speedy. I had a big job today. The biggest job I ever had, I think." Calvin came and sat on the edge of the couch, and he took his son's small hand in his big grease-stained one, and he looked at the boy who had taught himself not to run, and he felt his throat close. "Micah, I gotta tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing, okay? Because I've been telling you something every morning for a long time now, and today, it finally came true." Micah's eyes searched his father's face, and being 8 and smart, and having spent 4 months learning to read that face, he went very still. "Is it about the money?" he said. "Is it about my heart?" "It's about your heart." Micah's chin trembled just slightly, the way it did when he was bracing for something bad, because for 4 months, every conversation about his heart had been a bad one, and Calvin saw it, saw his son bracing, and he couldn't stand it another second. "It's good," Calvin said fast, his voice breaking on the word. "Micah, it's good news. It's the best news. Your surgery, the operation the doctor said you need, the one to fix the little thing in your heart, it's paid for. All of it. Every dollar. You're going to have your surgery, and it's happening soon, and after it's done." He had to stop. He pressed the boy's hand to his own chest. "After it's done, buddy, you're going to be able to run again. You hear me? You're going to run. You're going to play. You're not going to have to sit and watch the other kids anymore. Your heart's going to get fixed, and it's going to let you run." Micah stared at him. For a long moment, he didn't seem to understand, or didn't dare to, and then his small face crumpled all at once, and he threw his arms around his father's neck and started to cry, big, gulping 8-year-old sobs, the sound of a child who has been carrying something no child should have to carry, finally getting to set it down. "Really?" he managed. "Really, Dad? For real? You're not just saying it like the money." And that question, "you're not just saying it like the money," broke something in Calvin, because it meant his boy had known all along, had known every single morning that his father was lying to protect him, had carried the weight of that knowledge alone at 8 years old, and never once made his daddy feel bad about it. "No," Calvin said, holding his son tight, rocking him the way he had when Micah was a baby. "No, buddy. Not just saying it. I promise you, on your mama, on Dana, on everything, it's real. It's paid for. I saw it happen with my own eyes. I heard the hospital lady say it. It's real, and it's soon, and you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. Daddy found the little thing. Daddy found it, and it's gonna be okay." They stayed like that a long time, father and son on the couch under the blanket. A dead woman's hands had made, and Micah cried himself out, and then lay against his father's chest, exhausted and lighter than he'd been in months. And Calvin stroked his hair and stared at the ceiling, and thanked God over and over in the wordless way of a man who has run entirely out of words. "Dad," Micah said eventually, his voice small and sleepy. "Yeah, buddy. How did you pay for it? You said we didn't have the money. You said it every day, even when you didn't think I heard." Calvin smiled into his son's hair. "You want to hear a story," he said. "It's a good one. It's the best story I know, and it happened today, and it's all true." "Yeah, okay. So, a lady came to the garage today. A rich lady. Real rich, richer than anybody I ever met. And she had a fancy car, the fanciest car you ever saw, and it was broken. But it was broken in a way nobody could figure out. She took it to 3 different dealerships, the big fancy ones with the free coffee, and they had machines that cost more than our whole house, and every single one of them looked at her car and said, 'There's nothing wrong. We can't find anything.' But there was something wrong. She could feel it. She just couldn't prove it." "Like your heart," Micah murmured. "Like how they almost didn't find mine." Calvin's chest went tight. "Yeah, buddy," he said softly. "Exactly like that. Exactly. So she came to our garage. And you know what? At first she didn't think I could fix it either. She looked at our little shop and our peeling paint, and she looked at me, and she decided I probably wasn't good enough. A lot of people decide that about your dad, Micah. You know that. 'Cause they don't know you, Micah said fiercely the way he always did, and it cracked Calvin's heart clean open every single time. 'Cause they don't know me, Calvin agreed. That's right. But she was stuck, so she let me try. And I did what I always do. You know what I always do. You listen. I listen. I got quiet, and I listened to that engine, and I didn't guess, and I didn't grab the fancy machine and start throwing parts at it. I went slow. Everybody used to make fun of me for going slow even today. Some men outside the shop were laughing at me for it. But I went slow anyway, and I listened, and I used my hands, and I looked in the one place nobody else thought to look. Calvin reached into the pocket of his coveralls, and he pulled out the cracked fuse, the old one, the broken one, the 12-cent part he'd set aside on the fender, and pocketed on his way out. He held it up in the lamplight. And I found this. Micah sat up and looked at the small plastic fuse in his father's palm. What is it? It's a fuse. Costs 12 cents. You can buy 100 of them for the price of a pizza. Calvin turned it in the light so the crack caught. But this one had a crack in it. See it right there. So small you can barely see it. So small that 3 dealerships and $100,000 of machines looked right past it. But that tiny crack, that little 12-cent thing nobody thought was worth looking at, that was the whole problem. That was breaking a $2 million car. And I found it, and I fixed it, and the car ran perfect. He closed his hand around the fuse. And because I found it, the rich lady paid for your surgery. The whole thing. That's the story, Micah. A 12-cent part with a crack in it saved your life today. Micah stared at his father's closed fist. Can I have it? He asked. The fuse. Can I keep it? Calvin opened his hand and without hesitation pressed the little cracked fuse into his son's small palm. It's yours, he said. But you gotta promise me something. Someday when you're big, and you're gonna be big, you're gonna grow up and be big and strong and run all you want. Someday somebody's gonna look at you and decide you're not worth much because of how you look or where you come from, or how much money you got, or some reason that's got nothing to do with who you really are. It's gonna happen. It happened to me my whole life. And when it does... Calvin folded his son's fingers around the fuse, the way Camille had folded his own that afternoon. You take out this fuse, and you remember that the smallest, cheapest, most overlooked thing in the whole world turned out to be the thing that mattered most. You remember that the fancy machines were wrong, and your daddy was right. You remember that being small or cheap or overlooked, that's got nothing to do with your worth. You hear me? Nothing. I promise. Micah whispered, clutching the fuse. I promise, Dad. That's my boy. Calvin kissed the top of his head. Now let's get you to bed. You got a big couple of weeks coming, and you need your rest. He carried his son to bed. Micah was getting too big for it, really. But Calvin carried him anyway because he could. Because he was allowed to. Because for 4 months he'd been terrified he wouldn't get to keep carrying him at all. And he tucked him in, and Micah fell asleep with the 12-cent fuse clutched in his hand, and Calvin stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching the small chest rise and fall, rise and fall. A heart that was going to get fixed. A boy who was going to get to run. He did not sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and Dana's photo, and he told her everything out loud in the empty kitchen about the lady and the car and the fuse and the surgery. And if a man wants to believe his dead wife hurt him, well, that's between him and God, and it's nobody else's business. The surgery was scheduled for 11 days later. They were the longest 11 days of Calvin's life, and also, strangely, some of the happiest. Because for the first time in 4 months, the countdown he was living in was a countdown toward something instead of away from it. He kept the shop open. He fixed Mr. Pettigrew's Crown Victoria for free again. He replaced the tire shop men's, the same ones who'd doubted him, brake pads at cost when they came in sheepish and quiet. A few days later, one of them muttering, "That was something, Reed, what you did with that Bentley. Something else," which was as close to an apology as men like that knew how to get, and Calvin took it in the spirit it was offered and shook their hands. Camille called him twice during those 11 days. The first call came the morning after, early, her voice tight with nerves. "It's Camille. I'm about to walk into the presentation. 40 people. The whole future of the company. I wanted to hear a steady voice before I go in. You've got the steadiest voice I ever heard. How do you stay so calm when everything's on the line?" "I don't stay calm," Calvin said. "I just go slow. Panic makes you grab the first answer. Slow makes you find the right one. You go in that room, and when they throw something at you that scares you, you don't grab, you listen. You listen for the little thing under what they're really asking. Same as an engine. You'll be fine. You built something that catches the crack early. Go tell them about it like your life depends on it, because some kid's life does." She was quiet a moment. "That's good advice. It's 12-cent advice. Go save your company, Camille." She called back that afternoon, and Calvin could hear the difference in her voice before she said a word, that bright, breathless sound of someone who's just pulled off the impossible. "We got it," she said. "The funding, all of it, the whole room. Calvin, they stood up at the end. They stood up." She laughed, and it was a real laugh, young and delighted, nothing cold left in it anywhere. "And the car ran perfect the whole way there and the whole way back. Not a stumble. Not a hitch. I kept waiting for it, and it just purred. The whole time. I've never in my life been so happy to hear an engine do absolutely nothing interesting." "That's the sound of honest," Calvin said, smiling into the phone. "I'm real glad, Camille. I'm real glad for you. It's because of you. You know that. If you hadn't found that fuse, if I'd stumbled on that stage. But you didn't, and I did. So let's not spend a lot of time on the almost. You taught me that this afternoon. Remember, don't fix the feeling, don't spin it, just feel it. So feel this one. You won. Feel it. I'm feeling it." A pause. "Calvin, the offer, the job. I meant it. I still mean it. But I know you've got the surgery coming, and I don't want to crowd it. So I'm not going to push. I'm just going to leave it sitting there. And when Micah's through the surgery and out the other side, we'll talk. No sunset. No deadline. Whenever you're ready." "Whenever I'm ready," Calvin repeated. "Okay, after the surgery. We'll talk." The surgery came on a gray Tuesday morning. Calvin brought Micah to St. Aloysius before dawn, the boy sleepy and scared, and clutching the 12-cent fuse in the pocket of his hospital gown because he'd refused to be admitted without it. And the nurses, when they heard the story, let him keep it taped safe to a little card by his bedside where he could see it. Dr. Halloran came by before they took him back. A tired, kind woman with steady hands. And she crouched down to Micah's level, and she said, "You ready, champ?" And Micah, brave, the way only scared children can be brave, said, "My dad found the little thing, so I'm not scared. He always finds it." And Dr. Halloran looked up at Calvin with an expression he'd remember the rest of his life, and she said, "Well then, let's go fix your little thing." And they wheeled him back through the doors, and Calvin stood in the hallway, holding his son's blanket, and watched the doors swing shut. He was not alone in the waiting room. Camille was already there. She was sitting in a plastic chair by the window in jeans and a sweater. He almost didn't recognize her, without the armor of the suit, with 2 cups of coffee, and she stood up when she saw him and held one out. "I didn't know if you'd want company," she said, suddenly uncertain young. "I can go, but I thought nobody should sit in a room like this alone. I've been alone in enough rooms like this to know that. So I brought coffee. It's terrible. Hospital coffee, but it's hot." Calvin looked at her for a long moment, this young woman who'd driven up to his garage 3 weeks ago and thrown her keys at his feet and dangled his dying son in front of him like a treat. Then he took the coffee. "I'd be glad of the company," he said. "Sit with me." They sat. The surgery took 6 hours. 6 hours of terrible coffee and worse magazines and the specific agony of a waiting room clock, and Camille sat with him through every minute of it. And somewhere around hour 3, when Calvin's hands started to shake, and he couldn't make them stop, she reached over and put her hand over his, the way he'd done for her on the floor of the garage. And she didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say. And she just held his shaking hand still until it stopped shaking. And Calvin let her, because his mama raised him to accept a kindness as graciously as he gave one. "Tell me about Dana," Camille said at some point softly. "Not the file, the real thing. Tell me about her while we wait. It'll pass the time, and I think you don't get to talk about her enough." And Calvin, in the plastic chairs of the waiting room, told her about Dana. About how they met, about her laugh, about the little handshake she'd invented for Micah, grip twist bump, that he and the boy still did every morning. About the blanket she made. About the ring he'd almost sold, and now never would. He talked for an hour, and Camille listened, the way he'd taught her to listen, quiet, patient, not fixing, just receiving. And by the end of it, Calvin felt lighter than he had in years. Felt some ancient weight he'd been carrying alone, finally set down in the company of another person. "She sounds like she was the best of you," Camille said quietly. "She was the best of everything," Calvin said. "But she left me the second best. She left me Micah." He looked at the doors. "And I'm about to get to keep him." At the 6th hour, the doors opened, and Dr. Halloran came out still in her scrubs, and she was smiling, and Calvin was on his feet before she'd taken 3 steps. "He did great," she said. "He did just great, Mr. Reed. The repair went exactly as planned. The defect is closed. The arrhythmia should resolve as he heals, and barring anything unexpected, which I don't anticipate, your son is going to make a full recovery. He's going to grow up. He's going to run and play and do everything an 8-year-old boy should do." She put a hand on Calvin's arm. "He's going to be okay." Calvin didn't fall this time. He'd done his falling already 3 weeks ago on the garage floor. This time he just closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 4 months and said, "Thank you. Thank you, doctor. Thank you." And Camille behind him pressed both hands to her mouth and cried the happy way, the free way. The way she'd forgotten she knew how to cry until 3 weeks ago in a garage that smelled like oil. They let him see Micah an hour later when the boy was awake enough to know him. Micah was small in the big hospital bed, pale and groggy and tubed, but his lips weren't blue anymore. Calvin saw it the second he walked in. The faint blue cast at the edges that he'd watched creep in over 4 months, that he'd counted and feared and lain awake over it, was gone. His son's lips were pink. A heart that had been working too hard for 8 years was for the first time working right. "Dad," Micah croaked and lifted one small hand, and in it still was the 12-cent fuse. Calvin crossed the room and took his son's hand, fuse and all, and pressed it to his lips. "I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. You did so good. You did so good." "Did they fix my little thing?" "They fixed it. It's all fixed. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna run, Micah. Real soon you're gonna run." Micah smiled, sleepy and sweet, and his eyes drifted toward the doorway where Camille stood, hesitating, unsure if she belonged. "Is that the lady?" Micah asked. "The rich lady with the broken car. The one from the story." Calvin looked back at Camille and smiled. "That's her," he said. "That's the lady." Micah studied her with those solemn brown eyes, and then he lifted the fuse in his small hand and held it out toward her, and he said in his croaky post-surgery voice, "Thank you for my heart." And Camille Ashford, CEO, self-made, worth more than most men see in 10 lifetimes, who 3 weeks ago had thrown her keys at a poor man's feet and thought it was strategy, crossed the hospital room and knelt by an 8-year-old boy's bed and took his small hand in both of hers, fuse and all, and said through tears she didn't bother to hide, "No, sweetheart, thank your dad. Your dad found the little thing. Your dad's the reason. All I did was learn how to see him. Your dad taught me that." She looked up at Calvin. "Your dad taught me the most important thing anybody ever taught me." Calvin took the job. Not right away. He waited until Micah was healed, until the boy was running again, until he'd stood in the backyard one cold afternoon and watched his son sprint across the grass. Laughing. Actually laughing, chasing nothing at all. Just because he finally could, and Calvin had had to sit down on the back step, because his legs went out from under him at the sight of it. But after that, yes, he took the job. He kept the garage too. He couldn't sell it. Earl's shop, the place that had made him. So he hired 2 young men from the neighborhood. Kids nobody else would hire, kids with peeling paint of their own that the world had already decided about. And he taught them the trade, the way Earl had taught him. An engine only knows if you're listening or if you're lying. He put Earl's name back on the sign, right under his own Reed and Son, and under that smaller, in memory of Earl Whitmore, who listened. And he went to work for Camille. They built the job around him, the way she'd said they would. He didn't have an engineering degree, and he never would, and it didn't matter because what he taught the engineers couldn't be gotten from a degree. He taught them to sit still. He taught them to distrust the readout. He taught them that when the machine says everything's fine, and something in your gut says, otherwise, you reach in with your own 2 hands and you keep looking because the little thing missed is the thing that kills you. He kept a 12-cent fuse on his desk. Micah had insisted had given him a different one since the cracked one was the boy's forever, and when a young engineer got frustrated and wanted to trust the machine and move on, Calvin would pick up the fuse and hold it up and say, "You know what this cost me to learn?" and tell them the story, and they'd go back and look again, and more than once they found the little thing. Camille changed too. Not into someone soft, she was still iron. Still fast, still the sharpest person in any room. But the iron got pointed somewhere better. She started walking into the shops she'd have driven past. She started reading people instead of files. And when her company's pediatric device launched 2 years later, the one that watches a child's heart continuously, that catches the little thing early. That means no kid has to wait for the once-a-year checkup where they happen to hear the murmur. The very first family to receive one free for the rest of the child's life was chosen by Camille personally. It was a little girl from Calvin's neighborhood. A kid with peeling paint. A kid the system had already almost missed. They caught her little thing at 18 months. She'll never need the big surgery. She'll grow up running from the very start. And at the launch event, in front of a room full of investors and reporters and cameras, Camille Ashford stood up and did the thing she never used to do. She gave the credit away. She told the whole room about a garage with peeling paint and a man she'd almost driven past and a 12-cent fuse with a crack too small to see. She told them she'd built a company to catch the little thing early and had nearly missed the most important little thing of her life, a good man standing right in front of her that she'd decided wasn't worth her time. And she told them that everything the company had become since that day, every child it had saved and would save, traced back to the afternoon, a mechanic made her sit down in a broken folding chair and taught her how to listen. Calvin was in the audience that night in a suit that actually fit with Micah beside him. 9. Now healthy. Restless, tapping his foot. Because he wanted to go run around outside. And when Camille finished, and the room stood up to applaud, Micah leaned over to his father and whispered, "Dad, they're clapping. Is it 'cause of the fuse?" And Calvin Reed put his arm around his son, his living, breathing, running son, whose lips would never be blue again, and he pulled him close, and he said the truest thing he knew. The thing this whole long story had been for the thing. He'd have gone to his grave believing whether the world ever agreed or not. "Nobody," he said. "They're clapping because they finally learned what I always knew, that the smallest thing, the cheapest thing, the thing everybody overlooks, that's usually the thing that matters most. A 12-cent fuse saved a $2 million car. A boy nobody bet on grew up to run. And a man they wouldn't let touch a Bentley taught a whole company how to save children's lives." He kissed the top of his son's head. "Never let anybody tell you what you're worth by looking at your price tag, Micah. The world's been wrong about that since the day I was born. And it was wrong about me, and it was wrong about you, and it's going to be wrong about a lot of good people you'll meet in your life. You find the little thing in them. You be the one who looks close enough to see it. That's the whole job. That's the only job that ever mattered." The applause went on, and the lights were bright, and somewhere in Calvin's pocket, a father's promise sat next to a ring he'd never had to sell, and a boy who'd once taught himself not to run leaned against the chest of the man who'd refused against a whole world, telling him to quit, to ever stop listening for the little thing. And that is the truth of it. Plain and whole dignity is not measured by wealth. Worth is not written on a price tag. And the man everyone counted out found the one thing no one else could, because he was the only one who cared enough to listen. Calvin Reed saved his son with 12 cents and 20 years of being underestimated, and no machine, no dealership, no fortune on earth could ever have done what one overlooked man did with his own 2 hands. That is where the story ends. And that is exactly where it should.